In this video, we're going to talk about input, processing, and output. So, when you design a program, it's a good idea to do pre-work up front, otherwise you get a mess. There's a typical program development cycle. First, we design the program, and we write the code. And design the program includes gathering requirements from the user and building out what we need. We then correct syntax errors in our code, which are grammatical errors essentially. We test our program. Then there's another step here. We correct logic errors. We repeat this until we're sure it's good. Then we pass it off to the customer for a final user acceptance test. Design is vital, and if you catch your mistakes in design, it's considerably cheaper than if you catch them in production. So it's a really good idea. What is design? It's requirement gathering and then structuring your program. We need to understand the task that the program is to perform. We need to work with the customer to get a sense of what the program is supposed to do. We need to ask questions and create one or more software requirement types, typically called user stories. This is an iterative, ongoing process. When we build out a program, we need to determine the steps that must be taken to perform the task, break down the required task into a series of steps called an algorithm. And an algorithm is a listing of the logical steps to solve a problem. It's a set of well-defined logical steps that complete our problem. Oftentimes when we discuss a program, we're going to use one of two informal languages. We're going to use pseudocode, which isn't formal syntax, but it's describing it in a programming-like fashion. You can't run it. But it's used to create kind of the model of how our program and algorithm will work. And then you can translate it into code line by line as you write it. A flowchart is a diagram that visually depicts the steps in a program. Ovals are terminal symbols, meaning start and end. Parallelograms are input and output. Rectangles are processing symbols. Diamonds are conditionals. So here's a sample one where we start our program. We input the hours worked, input the hourly pay rate, calculate gross pay, and display the gross. Typically, a computer performs three-step process. Receive input, which is input any data the program receives while it is running. Perform some process on the input, for example, perform some mathematical calculations, and then produce the output. We can display our output with the print function. A function is a piece of pre-written code either by the programming language standard library or you can use it to define these. Arguments are data given to a function. They're called arguments when you define the function, but parameters when you define the function, they're called parameters. When you implement them, they're called arguments. Statements in a program execute in the order they appear from top to bottom. So we're going to talk a little bit about strings and string literals. A string is a sequence of characters that's used as data, like A, B, C, D, E, or your name. A string literal is a string that appears in the actual code of a program. A string literal must be enclosed in single or double quotes. They can be enclosed in triple quotes, so you can use single or double quotes within them, and you can have multiple lines. A comment is just a note of explanation. It is ignored by the interpreter, but it's very helpful and important to have. It's intended for a person reading the program's code, a human. They begin with a pound sign, and they can be end of line or beginning of line. If they're end of line, it ignores to the rest of the line. A variable is the name that represents a stored value in computer memory. It's how we access and manipulate data stored in memory. A variable references the value it represents. For example, age equals 29 says, create a box in memory, put the value 29 in it, and we're going to refer to it by age. The general format is variable equals expression, and we'll see this in code samples. The assignment operator, equal, says assign what's on the right to the left, and these can be compound expressions. You could have multiple expressions. You can use other variables in the expression. Variables receiving values must always be on the left-hand side. You cannot say 5 equals A. A variable can be passed as an argument to a function. Variable names should not be enclosed in quote marks because then they'll be treated like strings. You cannot use a variable if a value is not assigned to it. So if you say print x and X is nothing so far, it can't print it. You'll get an error. So in Python, we have to name our variables a certain way. First of all, they can't be Python keywords, and you'll learn more keywords as we go. They can't be things like if or elif or print. They can't contain spaces. The first character must be a letter or an underscore. After that, you can use letters and digits or underscores, but no other special characters. Variable names are case sensitive, but they should reflect its use. You should say something like variable name person rather than X. Our goal is to create human readable code, very elegant code. We're going to display multiple items with the print function by separating it with commas, and they're displayed in the order that's passed to the function. Again, we'll see this in the demos. Items are automatically separated by a space when displayed on the screen. Variable reassignment. Variables can reference different values while a program is running, and you can replace the variables. It is okay to say x equals x plus 1, which will take the prior value of x, add 1 to it, and store it in x. So if x equals 5 and you say x equals x plus 1, it will say the current value is 5, add 1 to it to get 6, and we're going to store it. Garbage collection is removal of variables that are no longer referenced. And that's carried out automatically. You don't have to worry about it. A variable can refer to any type of item. A variable that's been assigned to one type can be reassigned to another type. You can have a number and reassign it to a string, but in general, avoid that. It's not a great idea unless you're casting. Okay. Numeric data types, literals, and the string data type. Let's talk about them. Data types categorize values in memory. For example, integers, referred to as ints. We use floats for real numbers, and string is what's used to store strings in memory. A numeric literal is a number written in a program. No decimal point makes it an integer, otherwise it's a float. Some operations behave differently depending on the data type. So, here's a value in Python. A variable can refer to items of any type. You have x referring to the number 99, and you can change it to say a string, take me to your leader. It's not a great idea to do this, though. It causes a lot of confusion. Normally, the most times you'll convert is to convert like an integer into a floating point number, or vice versa. How do we get input from the keyboard? Most programs need to read input from the keyboard. And the way we do this is by using the input function. And the way this works is variable equals input and a prompt. Prompt is typically a string instructing the user to enter a value. It does not automatically display a space after the prompt.